This is Everyday Wellness, a podcast dedicated to helping you achieve your health and wellness goals and provide practical strategies that you can use in your real life. And now, here are your hosts, clinical health psychologist Dr. Kelly Donahue and nurse practitioner Cynthia Thurlow.
Hello, everyone. We are excited to have with us today Michael Moody. He is a personal trainer, author, researcher, motivational speaker, and a lifelong student of the mind and body. His fitness and life structure programs have helped his clients lose more than 3,000 pounds and transform their lives since 2005. With over 17,500 hours of one-on-one personal training sessions, Michael has truly refined his approach to fitness. Michael, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me today.
Oh, we're super excited. And I'd love to kind of dive into, what prompted your desire to utilize the power of mindset. I know that everyone has their own journey and their own background that kind of embraces all of that. But I think that the one thing that has been consistent throughout my lifetime, and I'm sure Kelly's as well, is that we recognize that mindset is everything.
Without a doubt, especially with my role as a guide in the health and fitness world. My book reflects a little bit about my story and my process to where I'm at today. And just thinking about what actually stirred this momentum, this place where I'm at today. And I really think about a short story that I wrote in sixth grade. And in the story, this man is in a hotel room, sitting there, and what comes of the story is this wild chase of sorts, and you could just imagine a sixth grader writing this. But by the end of the story, he ends up in the same place, almost the same exact scene that you might see in a movie, but the world is completely different. And as I moved on into high school and upper levels, I became more and more curious about how we're shaped by our experiences and our perspectives, and how maybe a situation may look the same from the outside, but underneath we have this depth, this ocean of experiences and perspectives that make for a very different being, very different position in life. But really, I guess most of where I'm at today and my interests stem from a curiosity that I can't necessarily put my finger on. I think it's more natural. I certainly had a grandfather that shared a lot of the same personality traits, but a brother who's also very different. And it's just one thing that I haven't quite figured out. But a sophomore basketball coach who taught a psychology class opened up that door, and I've been walking through it ever since.
I think that oftentimes when our own personal experiences lead us to a certain place, those lessons that we learn along the way become not only powerful for us, but also we have this desire to teach them to other people. And it really seems like that's what you are doing with your work in personal training and with your book as well. And one of the things that I loved in your book was that you talked about happiness as being derived by taking away things rather than adding things. In our society today, it's so easy to continue to add things to our plate, to add things to that we see on social media. It's just definitely a lot of information out there. Can you tell us how you came to this place of recognizing that it can be really valuable to remove things?
I think the first step is understanding the influences on our behavior, and that is the main purpose of the book, understanding the underlying influences on the steps that we want to take to pursue a professional or personal goal. And it's as you become more aware of the self and the things that drive your behavior, you begin to realize some of the positive and negative things. Like you said, it's a crowded field, and often at times it's oversensory. between what we see on social media, the news, magazines, newspapers, and more. So at times, what makes the most sense is to simplify and really think about these influences on us. There are things that you might keep, maintain, that have a positive influence, while others you feel that you need to remove. So the book doesn't necessarily push for us to remove things. It first pushes us to become more aware of whatever impacts us, and then decide from there what their role is. Personally, over the last decade, I have removed news, magazines, and newspapers from my life. A big part of it was my emotional connection to what I've seen. And of course, now we see a stir in society, a fire that has led to a number of different behaviors and perspectives, and perhaps division between many people. And I saw that within myself. And there are times where we can't avoid these things because we have to be aware of them, because we are impacted by these things in our environment. But I think there are times where you have to decide what that boundary line is. How much will you receive and how you will receive it? And this is across the board for me. So getting back to your question, there is a big need, especially with my personal training clients, to understand how they are impacted by everything in their life. And it seems like the natural first step for them, and I think this is their intent almost every time, is just to put in that fitness or diet plan and jump ahead and see what they want. But we know it's more complicated than that. We know some of these outside influences will create obstacles. And if we don't look at these, whatever influences are, then they're just going to continue a cycle that perhaps they've been involved in for many years.
That's the perfect segue. I'd love to kind of touch on this whole redefine approach. You're starting to kind of allude to this, but it was absolutely fascinating when I was going through your book. You know, this redefine approach that's based on a sequence of awareness, as you've already alluded to, acceptance, and adaptation. Can you please tell us how you came to this process? How did that actually evolve for you?
If we think about the adaptive process and our want to be efficient and effective, we can't disregard our starting place, our being, whatever might influence this process. And so naturally, the first step is to check with the foundation. If you were to sail across the world on the ocean, before you would set sail, you would want to make sure that the ship is sturdy, that there wasn't a hole in the boat. Otherwise, that could lead to trouble. But too often, we take a step without looking. It's perhaps an extension of my own experiences and failures, wondering why something might work for someone else and not for myself. And without that self-examination, you may just experience a lifetime of trial and error. With my clients very early on, although I had a focus on the physical self, it was clear through these cycles, these things that I witnessed with different people, that there was something missing. Perhaps something that wasn't part of their family language growing up, and it certainly wasn't part of mine. Awareness, this thought of the self, the thinking about thinking, understanding the drives behind their behavior. Because ultimately, if we want that change, if we want to be able to control some of those obstacles, you have to understand what is this unconscious that is often pushing them away from something that they are very serious about achieving. Otherwise, they're just going to repeat the same mistake. And of course, if it's been reinforced over a lifetime, we're combating an energy that's almost ingrained, that's been wired. So you almost can't make any change without becoming a human scientist first, observing yourself, the trends and patterns of you. And that's where the awareness comes in. The second part, acceptance, well, we know it's not always easy to see ourselves, our true selves, maybe to realize that we do have a strong perspective on something, but not always understand what may have extended to that perspective, what may have shaped that perspective. And sometimes fears and insecurities or other things in our environment, which we could or could not control, have contributed to that, but we've never faced it. And maybe the coping behavior has been avoidance, and it served us well for a very long time. But now it's time to change the script. But if there isn't this acceptance of our present states, or perhaps some of these experiences, then we may still succumb to some filter or lens that up to this point has affected our ability to adapt, has contributed to this cycle. For me, as I tell most of my clients and the people that I guide, the adaptive process, what we need to do is often the easiest. Seeing ourselves in the true form and accepting who we are and where we're at a current state tends to be the most challenging, and I'm sure you see this in your therapy sessions and working with different people.
Absolutely. And I think this is so important. I want to go back and highlight two of the things that you were saying. And the first is with regard to acceptance. I think so many people feel that if they accept where they are, they're sort of resigning themselves to stay there, when in fact it's imperative to be able to accept where you are now, because that is what is, and also hold this idea that change can happen. So that's the first piece. And then the second piece is that behavior change is often where people want to start. They want to work out with you at the gym. They want to get into doing things differently. But as you've said, without those previous steps, it's really impossible to not only make, but really to sustain behavior change. And so I'm curious, on a really practical level, how do you talk to your clients about this process to help them understand that if they want to get to this end where they are changing their behaviors, it really is necessary to take a deeper look at who they are and to accept who they are?
The biggest challenge for me is finding the language, speaking in a way that resonates with a person. There's so many different personalities, and you have a short amount of time to really build that trust. It's unfortunately, there isn't a streamlined approach that I'm able to use with every person that I meet with. It usually, there is a process that I use in terms of questions that clients must complete before we even meet to give me some idea about what their language is and some of their experiences. And during our first meeting, we really have to explore some of those experiences that may have shaped them. And of course, talked about their goals. But I think people have some curiosity, and of course, that's different based on the person. And if you start to identify different thought patterns, they become a little intrigued. But I also make it a rule that before we take a step forward, we do have to become a human scientist. We have to observe ourselves and what those trends are, physically, nutritionally, emotionally, and mentally. So we want to make a change in our diet, but before that, let's look at what we tend to go towards. And I do highlight, even in some of these destructive times or perhaps paths that are not leading them in the right direction, some of the strength and some of the reasons why they may be walking down that path and why it may have been a strength at one time and it isn't now. So I try to pique their interest in the mental aspects of what they're doing. And then, of course, using stories that they could connect to And I'm sure all of us, especially in terms of dating, can connect to some of these little things where I know personally with an ex, I would have the tendency to say something sarcastic, which would usually inflame the situation, so it wouldn't improve anything. So I remember a distinct time where I thought to myself, well, I'm going to go into this room. We're going to talk about this issue, but I'm going to hold my tongue. I'm not going to say anything sarcastic because in the past it would just make things worse, even if I thought I was right. And then, of course, when I would walk into the room, what happens? There goes my mouth. And I go on this tangent and begin saying something sarcastic. And again, it doesn't matter if you're wrong or right, but it's this tendency, even at times when we do want to change our behavior, we still kind of fall into these other habits. And many of us can relate to this. You're thinking about, while you're saying this thing in your mind, you're like, okay, just shut up. I said I wasn't going to do this, but then it just continues to spew from their mouth. But also, people can relate to this, especially with food. If someone's trying to lose weight, and we think about the emotional connection to the food, even when they know it's not helping them with their goals under certain states, maybe when they're stressed or fatigued, they still resort to what has brought them comfort up to this point. And again, it's not always an easy conversation, but if we could just open up the door a little bit and help them realize the impact of reinforcement and our emotional connection to things, it does help them begin to believe that they can regain some of that control. And of course, if we discuss it in terms of a process and help them understand that this is not an overnight thing, that helps.
I don't know about you, but I like to enjoy a nice glass of wine after a long day or with friends on the weekends. But the problem that I've encountered is that many wines have chemicals like pesticides or way too much sugar, which damages your health and sleep. Cynthia and I are both big proponents of sleep, so anything that damages our sleep is a no-go. We did some research and we found a company called Dry Farm Wine. They're the only health-focused natural wine club in the world. Their wine is all natural and additive-free, and it's lab-tested for purity, sugar-free, and low alcohol. So you can enjoy the taste of good wines without the massive chemical or sugar intake that can cause so many issues. When you join the Dry Farm Wine Club, you can choose how often you'd like to receive wines. You can choose monthly or every other month, or how many you'd like to receive. And you can choose the kind of wine you like. I prefer reds. As a special gift, if you sign up with our link, you can get a bonus bottle of pure natural wine with your first order for just 1 penny extra. That's right, 1 penny for an extra bottle of wine. Visit the link in the description to claim your bonus bottle of natural wine and join the Dry Farm Wine Club. Cheers.
What a gift to your clients that you actually consider that other aspect of health and wellness. The mindset piece is so absolutely critical, and recognizing whether they're maladaptive or beneficial patterns can be the first step in being receptive and open-minded to perhaps engaging in a new type of nutrition or looking at physical activity as something that's beneficial and not a hassle. But I would love for you to kind of touch a little bit more on how behavior change can be really profoundly challenging. Why do you think people have difficulty sticking to changes that they make to improve their health and wellness? What do you think actually is really behind that?
As I mentioned about reinforcement, these little things we do day to day, we don't realize the long-term impact. People who are right-handed tend to be right side dominant. You brush your teeth with your right hand. You pick something up with your right hand. You may also have that tendency to pick something up off the floor with the right side of your body. The day passes, a month passes, a year passes. Before you know it, there's an imbalance. There's asymmetry because of overuse. And even when you become aware of this imbalance, this dominance, we still will resort to this. It becomes our autopilot. And that's intriguing to me, these things that become autopilot. And it is also a cell, right, that we could achieve change, and it doesn't have to be our constant focus for a lifetime. We will continue to have to do check-ins, without a doubt, whether it's financially, nutritionally, physically, or anything else. But it is possible, if we wire the right habits, that you can operate on autopilot, and your brain and your body will work for you, and it'll keep you aligned on that path of what you originally said. But it comes back to reinforcing, and I try to separate this process from age, which often tends to be part of the language of my clients and many people, especially when it comes to physical injury, which tends to be an obstacle for a lot of people. But if we really think about it, is it always about age? Or is it just the things that we do out of repetition? So you see a theme here that crosses many realms of life. It's this reinforcement of behavior that we see in the physical side, the nutritional side, the mental side, and emotional. And if we have the ability to change the script or to wire new habits, behaviors, it's amazing what a new narrative we may have in life.
That's so valuable. Cynthia and I see clients who are very well educated in health and fitness and nutrition, but yet we know that that information, that knowledge doesn't always translate to action. And even when we get people on board making changes, people often feel that they self-sabotage, that they go back to engaging in behaviors like tending to sit on the couch more, or maybe eating the foods that they know aren't good for them. And it really seems like what you're saying is that we need to have compassion and understanding that these things are wired at a neurochemical level, and that it takes time and effort to change them. Would you say that's correct?
Without a doubt. And a couple things came to mind as you were saying that. The first of which relates back to my request when you reached out about this interview. And I had asked that we didn't discuss anything health and fitness, because too often I find if we lead with an idea, and even if I know exactly what a person needs to do, like I have studied this person, we have tested medically and across the board, we know exactly, that doesn't mean that they're going to receive it. And even if they do consider it for a moment, they're going to take this information and see where it fits into their paradigm of life. And a lot of times they'll ask themselves, how does this fit into their social lifestyle or what they know? And then, of course, if it's truly out of bounds of what they're accustomed to, they may even retreat faster than anything else because of the discomfort that's involved. Even if, and I'm sure, like for instance, if I had comments about intermittent fasting, to say, you know what, I just don't believe in it. I do understand your perspective on it. Your thought might be, well, I don't know how I feel about Michael and what he knows about nutrition, and may change anything else that I say beyond that comment, even if it's not related. But then if I mention something about the effect of fasting, especially for someone that's diabetic, and the positive effect on glucose, you might say, well, I think that's a little closer to what I believe. You may be more receptive to everything I say after that. And so it's an interesting position for me in terms of presenting solutions for people, or just serving their guide, and being very mindful of how I deliver that. Because, again, it is how do they receive it, and what do they do with this information? Now, to your other point about self-sabotaging, I don't always think it's a bad thing if it's under my guidance. In fact, I prefer to put everything on the table so we could see these tendencies. And certainly it's frustrating process because usually it's looked at it as taking steps back, but we self-sabotage for many reasons, sometimes protective or, like I mentioned earlier, fears, insecurities. But the best thing that we could do as guides is just to bring some awareness to it and to explore it a little more. Now, I know personally, I had dealt with quite a bit of anxiety over a lifetime. And what's interesting for me is that anxiety never really pushed me away from doing different things like public speaking. What I would do is just suffer while I still did some form of public speaking, which is like some type of self-flagellance. It took me a long time to really understand what this energy was inside of me and how to truly harness that. And I think in many ways that is my goal with my clients, to understand their energy and finding ways to harness it in a very positive way that helps them reach their goals. And for me, what I realized, this anxiety was this signal, this flag, this tell that, one, I may not have enough information to continue what I'm doing, or two, something just doesn't feel right about the situation and it requires more research or further examination. I think for many people, and I can relate to this at different points, it has stemmed from insecurity, especially at a more immature age. But you just hope, like as I do, that you just recognize these things and you know how to use it in a positive way instead of a self-sabotaging way.
And that makes a great deal of sense. So just to kind of pivot a little bit before we end our conversation, you have tips for redefining our life that are defined as develop a routine, remind yourself to enjoy each day, simplify your life. Can you please give us some examples of each of those steps?
Yeah, the tips are really depending on the person and what they need at a given point. But generally speaking, I think if all of us study the trends and patterns of us, if we sit down and examine, and sometimes it requires writing these things down, and so you actually see across the many days or weeks and what you're doing physically, nutritionally, emotionally, mentally, then you really start to detect something here, your narrative. The next step there is obviously a reflection, thinking about how it is push you in certain directions, how it affects you, your environment, and the people around you. And then figure out from there, what's the best way to adapt if needed? And thinking about, is this my optimal self? And that's another thing that we haven't really discussed, which is this framing. And I often feel before we move in any direction, whether it's within awareness, that part, or the adaptation part of the process, be mindful of the framework, the structure of this change that we're trying to make, but then also the anchor. Where is everything extending from? And it relates to what we discussed earlier in terms of awareness of the self, because this anchor should extend from our needs and who we are. And then in the adaptive process, we should consider if it's a goal of losing weight, is this based on pursuing your optimal self, or is this some other type of goal that's more social or superficial in some ways? And so studying the trends and patterns of you and determining the anchor, but integrating awareness, acceptance, and lots of reflection.
Well, we love all of that. We're such huge advocates for awareness and mindfulness as necessities for making change. And we would love it if you could now give our listeners 2 very practical tips, things that they could do to have a visible impact on their health and wellness every day?
I would recommend, like I said before, writing down what you're doing for a 3-day span to really make any type of change. That is one tip I recommend for anybody. I would also consider creating, there's so many different directions to go here, and I also know a lot of it has to do with personality. For myself, I like to gather information. So before I take any step, I would advocate for anyone else, try to get as much information about you as possible and put it in front of you. And so you could determine from there what's the next best step for you to move forward. But in terms of something specific to health and fitness, I would also be mindful of the resources that you're reviewing and the information that you're receiving. If you read a study and it says that if I eat ice cream every day for 30 days, then I'm going to reach my optimal self and lower my blood sugar levels and become resistant to heart disease. I mean, all of us might think that seems ridiculous, although I wish that was true. Who doesn't love ice cream? But I feel too many people will make a choice or accept something because it relates to their wants, right? So really the question that you should ask yourself are, what are my blind spots here? What am I not considering? Maybe something is a signal. Okay, maybe there is a health benefit of ice cream, but to not stop there and to take that extra step, well, what is this study based on? And maybe upon further exploration, you realize that this study was performed with 6 white males that are 6'4" that live in South Dakota and on a farm, and it's a fairly small sample size. Now, it's not to say that there's no value in that study, but maybe we should wait before we take that as a truth. So too often, whether it's politically, nutritionally, or anything on the physical side, we accept something as a fact, but we rarely question where it stems from, or we rarely question whether or not we accept it because of how aligned it is with our current lifestyle.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure interviewing you this morning.
Definitely. Thank you for having me on. And of course, thank you for everything that the two of you do, contributing to the consciousness of the world. I appreciate it.
And if people want to learn more about you or your book, can you please tell us how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I have separated myself a bit from social media to maintain my own sanity. So I would steer people to my website, michaelmoodyfitness.com, where you can read many of my articles and learn more about my book, Redefine Yourself, The Simple Guide to Happiness. Right now, I also have a podcast, so you can listen to The Elements of Being on any podcast platform, where I explore the underlying influences on behavior, but also helping myself and other people understand what makes something non-negotiable. And that's a good place to start.
Well, you've definitely left us with some wonderful resources. We're so very grateful for your time this morning.
Excellent, and thank you.
Thanks for listening to Everyday Wellness. If you loved this episode, please leave us a rating and review, subscribe, and remember, tell a friend. And if you want to connect with us online, visit the link in the show notes.